Hello everyone, and welcome to the Peddling Princess Podium. I'm your host, John Nardelli. And today I'd like to talk to you about quality sound recording, particularly as it applies to film and video production. Sound is an often overlooked aspect of video production, and yet, in many ways, it can be as important or more important than the picture. Think of it this way. If you go to a movie, where do you get most of the information about what's going on in the story? From what people are saying to each other. So hearing what they say is obviously vital to understanding what's going on in the story. Even those in professional circles often overlook one of the guiding principles that makes good sound good, and that is the concept of dynamic range. Well, what's that? That's the difference between the loudest point in your recording and the quietest point in your recording. The difference between the two is your dynamic range. Now, a lot of people making recordings think, well, my recording has to be as loud as I can possibly make it, so people will be able to hear it, it'll stand out next to other people's recordings and so on. So in order to make it louder, they try to make everything as loud as possible, and very rarely ever have anything quiet. Now, this sounds good on the surface, loud is good, but it actually colors the sound in ways that, especially the amateur, and in some cases the professional, don't fully realize. Now, sounds in nature, of course, are not all one volume level. There's different volume levels, like a thunderclap is much louder than the bird chirping. And one of the principles of creating lifelike, good quality sound is to try to record the louder sounds louder than the quieter sounds. Now, here's a demonstration of this principle. I've created a sound file here. Please close your eyes while you listen to this and picture a movie screen in front of you with me standing about 25 feet away in a jungle holding a hand grenade. I pull the pin and I throw the grenade at you. It explodes at your feet.
Fire in the hole!
Now, as you can hear, the explosion in that recording is recorded a lot louder than everything else. And that's as it should be, because an explosion would be a lot louder than anything else, any other sound in that recording, if it was actually happening in front of you. And the point of good sound recording is to try to make it sound like the event is really happening in front of you. Now watch what happens if I take that same recording and run it through a compressor, which is a device that takes loud sounds, brings them down a bit, takes quiet sounds, brings them up a bit, so that all the sounds in the recording are more or less the same level.
Fire in the hole!
The explosion now sounds more like a firecracker than a grenade, because the jungle sounds, the pulling of the pin, and my voice are all almost as loud as it. So it really doesn't sound impressive anymore, and if you listen to the file, it just doesn't sound natural at all. Okay, so why don't engineers simply record all recordings to be dynamic? But there's also another force driving sound engineers, and this is more related to the music industry, although it applies to television as well, and I'll speak about that in a moment. It's called the Loudness Wars. Now, the idea is that artists want their music to stand out when played out on the radio. So they try to make their music as loud as it can be. Now, of course, a radio transmits all of the songs at the same level, and also the user at home has their volume set at one level. So how do you get your music to sound louder? Well, the only way since the music is already as loud as it can get as far as the maximum capability of the recording medium, the only way to make it sound louder is to compress the sounds. Because sounds that have narrower dynamic range do sound louder overall. If you want to hear this principle in action, all you have to do is sit down and watch some television for a while. Have you ever been watching a television show or a movie, you've got it at a volume level you find comfortable, and you're all relaxed, and then they go to a commercial break, and all of a sudden, they're in your face with a commercial for insurance, or a car, or a new computer, or whatever it may be. And the reason that it sounds so loud is not because the volume has suddenly gone up. Your volume is still the same, and the maximum level your system can now produce at that volume is still the same. But what they do is they take the voice and compress it so that the natural variations in voice tone are all compressed to almost the same volume level. This is my voice recorded with no compression whatsoever. The volume level of my voice varies as I speak, and those variations in turn are reproduced exactly in the recording, just as the microphone originally picked them up. This recording of my voice has been compressed. That is to say, the loud portions of my voice have been turned down, and the quiet portions of my voice turned up to match. So the overall level of my voice remains relatively constant instead of varying up and down as I speak. Now you see how much louder my voice was in the second take? All I did was apply dynamic range compression to my voice so that instead of all the natural tones of my voice going up and down, my voice was recorded much higher level, the quieter parts. And my voice sounded overall much louder. The maximum level of my voice did not change, but the level of the quieter parts of my voice did. How loud we perceive something to be, as far as the human ear is concerned, is a function of how loud something is over time, not the maximum level it reaches. Like in my earlier example with the grenade explosion was extremely loud, but the overall recording was fairly quiet, because most of the sound that you hear was the jungle sound effects in the background, which were mixed to be very low. As I pointed out earlier, volume on whatever device a person is listening on is what controls the volume level. Let's go back to our TV example. If you're there and you're watching the TV and the loud commercial comes on, what do? You probably reach over to your remote and turn the volume down back to where you found it comfortable. Then when the show comes back on, you turn it back up to match the overall level of the show. And that defeats the whole purpose of doing the whole thing louder in the first place. And to top it all off, if you take a compressed soundtrack and turn it down, all you end up with is a compressed, terrible, wimpy sounding soundtrack. If you took let's go back to the recording I made earlier.
Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole!
Now you see, again, the explosion doesn't have any punch in the compressed version of the recording. And even when you turn it down, the explosion doesn't suddenly turn itself back up. It's still low because the recording actually has it close in volume to everything else. So if you turn it down, the whole thing just sounds wimpy, terrible, and unnatural. In the old days, dynamic range compression used to come in handy because soundtracks, especially for television in the 1960s and 70s, had so much noise, the noise floor was so high, that in order for you to even hear the soundtrack at all, you had to keep the loud and soft sounds close together. But with today's digital technology, that is no longer necessary. It is possible now, with high-definition television with digital sound, to preserve a full-range dynamic soundtrack. So in my opinion, whether it's for music, television, the sound should be mixed with the full dynamic range, and then leave it up to the end user how loud it's going to be. Now, if you're producing your show and you know that it's probably going to be played on a few systems that are less than good sound quality, like small devices, then just make sure that the maximum level of your program is as loud as you can get it, but leave the dynamics alone. Let things get quieter when they're supposed to, or louder when they're supposed to. The person, even on a small system, they're still going to be able to hear all the key sounds in your soundtrack, and ultimately those with the bigger systems and higher quality systems will thank you for the increased dynamics and sound quality. Thank you for watching the Pedaling Princess Podium this week. I'm your host, John Nardelli, and I hope to see you all again here next week. Bye for now.